Hello and welcome to the Newscentre. I'm Shereen Bhan. India is close to starting free trade negotiations with the Gulf Cooperation Council. Earlier this week, UAE's Foreign Minister met India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar to deepen the relationship between the two countries. India and the UAE are expected to surpass bilateral trade worth $88 billion this year. That's as per reports. In fact, UAE is India's third largest trading partner after the US and China. And for the first time, the UAE has signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with India, which was inked in February. The aim is to increase bilateral goods trade to over $100 billion in the next 5 years. UAE is also a member of the G20, for which India has assumed the presidency today, and the next climate summit, COP28, will be held in the UAE. Joining me now to talk about all of this and more is Dr. Abdulnasser Alshaali, UAE's Ambassador to India. Ambassador Alshaali, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18 and appreciate the fact that you have chosen to speak with CNBC-TV18 in your first broadcast interview after taking over as UAE's Ambassador to India.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Ambassador, let me start by talking to you about the progress that has been made post the inking of the CEPA. The 5-year target is $115 billion in bilateral trade. Reports seem to suggest that we could well be on course of anywhere between 88 to 90 billion this year. If you can give us a status check and an update of what seems to be working on the ground as far as the CEPA is concerned and where we could be headed.
Well, if that's the case, then my job is done already. I believe the correct target is 100 billion US dollars in non-oil trade over the next 5 years. You were absolutely right. We are on track to achieving quite a high number this year and next year in terms of overall bilateral trade. But non-oil bilateral trade is to continue to grow over the next 5 years. CEPA, as you mentioned, is the framework that we are operating within and is the context for the economic and trade ties at the moment and moving forward. So what we're trying to do is to raise awareness about what CEPA offers in terms of benefits, how can not only big investors benefit from it, but also SMEs, whether they choose to set up shop in India or to set up shop in the UAE.
Yes, you said you are on course to achieve that $100 billion target as far as non-oil imports trade is concerned. But Ambassador, let me talk to you about what's happening on crude at this point in time. We have seen crude prices come off quite sharply in light of what we have seen happening in China. Prices have edged back a little higher. There is a crucial meeting on Sunday of the OPEC. The expectation is that perhaps it could be a status quo, there could be a rollover policy. What is your own outlook on where things currently stand as far as prices are concerned, and what could the possible outcome be?
Well, if we're looking at food security and energy security, both files are important for the UAE and for India. Starting with food security, and as a country that imports the majority of its food from abroad, India is a reliable partner, and it has always been a reliable partner for the UAE, with special thanks for the Indian government and their role in doing so. And I'm not just talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, but I'm also talking about the 2008 global financial crisis and the years in between and the years before that. Now, when we talk about food security for the UAE, obviously, as a major importer of food from abroad, it is always important to make sure that we have excellent supply chains, or at least supply chains that are resistant to what's happening in terms of whether it's a pandemic or any other crisis that hits various economies. At the same time, food security is an important file for India because it creates livelihood, it increases income for farmers, and it also makes sure that that food is moving from one place to another, which means it can garner higher prices being sold to markets at market prices. In terms of energy, energy is also a very important file for India, and the UAE as a reliable, responsible partner in the energy market is, I would like to say, a very good partner, and will continue to be a very good partner for India in terms of energy security. Now, in the wider context of energy markets, it's also our role to ensure that energy prices are stable, and whatever direction or whatever trend that oil prices take, we just want to make sure that they don't oscillate too much into the too much upwards in terms of pricing or downwards. We want the energy market to be stable, to be predictable, to as great of an extent as possible.
Yes, volatility is not something that anybody wants at this point in time, especially when we talk about energy prices. Ambassador, let me ask you about the talks that have started as far as an FTA with the GCC is concerned. In light of the CEPA inked between the UAE and India, what role do you believe the UAE can play in this larger GCC FTA with India?
Well, having a CEPA with India means that there is some sort of a model that you can follow or a model that you can improve on and expand to the entire GCC market. And the fact that we were able to do it in such a short period of time, in 88 days or so, says a lot about the relationship and the importance that both countries attach to CEPA. And I believe this importance will also be passed on to the GCC market in terms of what CEPA means and what having a free trade agreement means for the wider GCC market.
Talking about deepening relationships, especially as far as the energy market is concerned, there are reports that suggest that perhaps both sides, India and the UAE, are in talks for an Indian consortium of public sector energy companies to look at enhancing their participation in oil blocks in the UAE. Can you update us on where things currently stand, if in fact that is on the cards?
The UAE is, as I mentioned, sees energy security and food security as important files, just like India sees both files as important. And the reason I'm mentioning food security here as well is because the UAE is an investor in India's food security, and it's only normal to see Indian companies and Indian investors as well interested in investing in their energy security, whether they are doing it in their domestic market or in the UAE or in any other place that they find business opportunities in.
Well, speaking of food and energy security, UAE is going to be hosting COP28. We've just come off, the last big climate summit. What's the expectation now on taking the baton forward? What is it that the UAE would like to achieve and like to address when we talk about COP28?
In COP28, we would like to build on what has been already achieved. India has done a lot in terms of committing to certain goals and to having ambitious targets. The Indian government is quite serious about it. They make that very clear, not only in the COP forum, but also in other forums. And the UAE's role is to support India in achieving its goals, as well as bridging the gaps that are existing at the moment and making sure that we commit to certain climate goals that would be beneficial for everyone.
Speaking of COP28, today is also an important day as India has assumed the presidency of the G20. And of course, this is going to be something that will play itself out over the course of the year. The Prime Minister, of course, has said that India hopes to put new ideas on the table. What is it that the UAE, that the world expects from the presidency that now India has assumed?
As you would know already, the UAE is being invited now for the second time as a guest country and has been invited previously twice as the chair of the GCC. And the way we look at it is we want this kind of engagement to continue. We want to support the Indian presidency. We want to make sure that we are active, that we are participating in all of the working groups at the highest level. And that's a commitment that the UAE government has made to the Indian government, and that it will see through throughout the Indian presidency all the way to the Leaders Summit in September 2023 that will take place in Delhi.
Yes, we are looking forward to that. But Ambassador, you touched upon food security, and part of the relationship between India and the UAE is also the aspiration of deepening our engagement as far as food corridors are concerned. Could you update us on where things stand on that front, and what is the aspiration for the future?
The UAE has invested in food security and in food warehousing, and will continue to do so with India, and will even seek other partnerships whether they are in the Indian domestic market or elsewhere. Our collaboration and our cooperation is not only within the bilateral aspect of the relationship, but also extends to other forums, to other countries, wherever we see and seek our mutual interest and benefit. Food security is one aspect of it, but there are so many other aspects to it as well.
So, speaking of other aspects, Ambassador, and I'll end by asking you that, what would be the areas of priority where you would like further acceleration of momentum to deepen the engagement between both sides?
CEPA is the top priority, and every single time we sit in a meeting, whether it is at the highest level in government or whether I'm talking about any other level at the working groups, the question is always how can we do more, and what is the way to achieving more. And so starting from there, I believe CEPA is the top priority, because what CEPA can achieve and what we can do within the context of CEPA means that we can do so much more on space, technology, we can do so much more on energy security, food security, we can expand investment and trade ties, we can make sure that we provide opportunities to SMEs in both countries, and we make sure that we can take those SMEs to internationalize. We can focus on trade, not in terms of volume, but in terms of value, which means that both countries benefit from CEPA and any other CEPAs and free trade agreements that both countries would sign in the future, in terms of capturing more and more of the value chain and making sure that the UAE and India are enshrined in the global supply chain for different goods and for different commodities.
Ambassador Alshaali, we wish you the very best of luck here in India, and we appreciate you joining us here to take us through where things currently stand in the partnership and, more importantly, what the road ahead looks like. Appreciate your time. We are going to head into a short break, but up next, a special conversation with the global CEO of Body Shop, David Boynton. He's bullish on India as well. That and more when we return. You're watching the Newscentre. Body Shop CEO David Boynton is bullish on India, believes that Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities will catapult the company's growth in the country. Speaking exclusively to my colleague Ashwat Kumar, he said that despite post-pandemic digital push, offline stores continue to drive 75 to 80% of sales for Body Shop.
Right, a very good evening and welcome to a special broadcast. Joining me with me right now is Mr. David Boynton. He's the global CEO for the Body Shop. Mr. Boynton, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
It's a pleasure having you here. From our conversation from just a moment back, you told us that the last time you were here in India was back in 2006, and now that you're here in 2022, a lot has passed in these 16 years. We've seen very many developments, more recently the pandemic as well. I'll come to that in a bit. Let's first discuss what brings you here from a Body Shop perspective. What excites you about India? What brings you here?
So, absolutely, and it's a great pleasure to be with you, and thank you for inviting me. So, very excited to be back in India for the first time in too long, I have to say. My career's taken me in different directions. I've been in Europe, I've been in the US, and it's been amazing for me coming back after all this time to see how much India has changed. I'd been to Mumbai and New Delhi before, and how they've changed and evolved and moved on has been absolutely extraordinary to experience. I've also had the pleasure of going to Jaipur on this trip, which just blew me away. I absolutely loved it. So really incredibly exciting to be here. So slightly strange, really important market for the Body Shop, and I've been at the Body Shop now for 5 years. And with India being the number 4 market, it might seem slightly strange that I've taken this long to get here. But the reason for that is the market's doing so well. It's our number 4 market in the world. We believe it can become number 2 behind the UK in the next 3 to 5 years. The team here is doing a brilliant job. And when I joined the Body Shop, there was a lot to do. And one of the fires that I needed to put out was not in India. India was already doing great. So now it's not about coming here to solve a crisis. It's coming here to get closer to the team and figure out how we can partner together to make the Indian market even more successful for the Body Shop.
What's interesting, let's talk about India. What's interesting is that I was going through a few data points about the TBS operations here in India. It's exciting because we're talking about as many as 65 cities. We have a footprint in terms of 200 stores is what we're looking at as far as the Body Shop is concerned. I just want to get your perspective in terms of what the journey in the Tier 2, Tier 3 cities has been like. Because I understand that will be the focus of the next 25 store launches, that the cities like Varanasi, Indore, Patna, Shimla, these are cities you don't normally directly associate with affordable luxury consumption. So just your sense, how the tier 2, tier 3 growth story has been for you in India.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been absolutely fascinating for us because, as you say, it's not the natural territory that you would associate an international sort of prestige brand being able to operate in those areas. But I think it's the unique strength of the Body Shop, that we have our pricing architecture is really quite broad. So we have much more accessible products than many in our industry. It's possible to come into our store and buy our high quality products for as little as 250 rupees. So, there's a breadth of pricing that allows us to operate where other brands can't. And I think the thing that's also interesting for us is, it's typical for brands that are operating at our level of quality to be charging 2 or 3 times higher prices than we are. One of the things that we've worked incredibly hard at, and I've worked in the industry for quite a long time, as you can probably tell, and with the phrase we usually say is, it's not my first rodeo by any means, but the benchmark that I set the team when we started about rejuvenating our product portfolio when Natura acquired the business was to set brands that are 2-3 times more expensive. The quality has to be the same or better.
Sure.
Right, but we want to make it accessible. And we're going to do that across all of the categories of a typical beauty player. So we have hair care, skin care, body care, we have fragrances, and we have makeup. And there's really nobody else operating in our space that's able to cover those 5 categories. So we think pricing, value for money. I mean, we're not the cheapest, we're not a mass player, that's absolutely clear. But value for money and breadth of categories really gives us a unique proposition that allows us to reach further than other international brands could.
I think in part you've preempted my next question, but let me ask you that anyhow. You mentioned you're not a mass product player, but nonetheless, as you said, it's not the cheapest product out there as far as personal care is concerned. Here, I'm just going to cite the analogy that was presented very recently and was reported quite widely by the management of Mercedes. They said they're suffering because the Indian consumer, they're saving more and then they're investing more through SIPs, essentially making the point that Indian customers love to save money. How do you overcome that?
Well, we see that as an opportunity. So, I mean, I think it's all about where the current level of consumption is taking place. So, clearly, mass brands are mass brands. We don't play in that territory. We don't believe that our consumers confuse us with a mass brand. But when you look at some of the so-called luxury brands that we respect, of course, that are 2 or 3 times more expensive, then we think that's a fantastic opportunity for an Indian consumer. Because, look, our argument is to say, you've got a product which is very high quality, right, which is having a positive social impact and a positive environmental impact because of all the care of the programs we're putting in place around packaging and formulas. If you have that product and you could be paying a half or a third of what you're paying today, then it wouldn't be very intelligent to do that, right? So the Body Shop becomes the natural solution for a savvy Indian customer. So I think that presents an exciting opportunity for us.
That's a very interesting perspective because, like you said, a lot of people were not so optimistic about the retail space. But now that we see that we have the pandemic, that did become a very dominant trend for a lot of brands, for a lot of sectors. That to drive growth, you have to have a digital footprint. That's what's going to drive growth. What has been the journey for you? We see a very clear, determined push, like you said, for brick and mortar stores. But at the same time, we also understand that TBS has a digital footprint, and you mentioned that the sales are twice as much as what it was earlier. Can you give us a sense of what the split is between brick and mortar and digital stores and what the strategy will be going forward?
Sure. Broadly speaking, we imagine that we're going to land at somewhere around somewhere in the range of 75-25, maybe 80-20, that kind of split between physical stores and online. And it's important, not to underplay. Whilst I'm a lover of retail, I'm also a realist and a pragmatist, right? We have a whole bunch of customers who enjoy shopping online. I think one of the things that's fascinating, people talk about omni-channel, and they imagine that the customer is on this journey where they're connecting with the brand across multiple channels. Some customers do that, but actually, if you're an online shopper, you kind of only shop online. If you're a store shopper, you kind of only shop in stores. So people really like the channels that they like. So how do we take care? We're doing a fantastic job with experiential retail in our stores. Online, I think we have to get even more sophisticated in terms of the technologies that we're applying to customer relationship marketing. The team here have been hiring brilliant people, Stanford graduates, really outstanding IT professionals, data scientists, to help us find patterns in the millions of transactions that we have, so that we're making sure that the proposition we're delivering to individual customers really feels personalized and relevant to them. So, we're going to move forward in both channels. It's not one or the other. But we're imagining somewhere around about 80-20 being the kind of split that we'll see in the Indian market.
Let's talk about 2023. You said that is going to be the year where you hope that a lot of plans will fructify. But that also happens to be a time where we're seeing a number of global headwinds. We're talking inflation. More recently, we've seen a lot of layoffs. Does that inspire some concern that people may be pulling back on discretionary spends, and that may perhaps be a headwind that you will have to contend with?
I think one of the things I've learned, absolutely. You pick up the newspapers, frankly, in any country in the world right now, and it's pretty depressing. There's not a bunch of good news out there. I think over the last 3 years, if there's one thing that I've really learned, that's not to predict the future. Because I've had so many people telling me what's around the corner, and almost in every case that hasn't been true. So I think there is a risk. I think the consumer in many markets is hard-pressed. Inflation is undeniable, not to make light of that. You look at the impact of energy costs, particularly in European markets. It's a challenge, and the consumer is squeezed. We believe that, based on what we were talking about earlier, very high-quality product at a price point that's a half to a third cheaper than the equivalent brands from a quality perspective, means that if we can tell that story well, we should be in a good position to win. So, look, I've worked in entrepreneurial businesses for the last 20 years. You can't survive in that environment unless you're optimistic. I am optimistic, and I think we'll be able to navigate the headwinds.
That's the global CEO of Body Shop, confident about growth in India. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of News Centre. Don't go anywhere. The news continues here on CNBC-TV18.